Hello, let us resume our reading of Preludes by T.S. Eliot. In the last two sections, that means section 1 and section 2, we have found that Eliot is presenting the night section, or that is the evening, and therefore there was the particular reference to the morning when the consciousness comes and anything is associated with them. So everywhere, whether it is the matter with the evening or it is the matter with the morning, you can find that the grimy aspects of life has been incorporated by the poet in this particular poem. So let us begin with the third section. As you can see that the section actually begins with a reference to you. So fundamentally in the last section where there was a particular reference to a particular prostitute, as we can find that ultimately the prostitute or the matter of prostitutions has been hinted at, but here you will find the direct reference to you, it is actually incorporated in terms of something specific. You see that in the third prelude we are presented one of the 1,000 furnished rooms, you see, okay, of the second prelude. That means that the 1,000 furnished rooms that have been generally being incorporated in second prelude, this have been taken for consideration here in the third. There a woman was preparing to get out of her bed, okay, and the you of the first three lines, it is schematized as anaphora. You can find it is a kind of a figure of speech where the three you has been used at the very beginning of these lines. And so it's a woman whom the observer describes with the morning comes to consciousness of the second prelude. The woman is preparing to get out of her bed and sluggishly she is struggling to awake herself, and her state of consciousness is between sleeping and awakening. She is consciously trying to resume herself, wearing a mask and prepare for performance in the life's masquerades that have been incorporated or referred in the last prelude. Eva Figes, in her novel Waking, presents the consciousness of a woman between waking and sleeping throughout her lifetime in 7 phases, from childhood to old age. Roland Bush says Eliot's poetry is crammed with dreams, starting with the preludes. Here, Eliot too presents a similar state of woman in consciousness. Though Eliot here attempts to treat her consciousness objectively, the reader in the final outcome are not given an objective reading of the perception. From the London streets, the preludes moves into the bedroom that have been incorporated here. And ultimately, you will find the description of the Londoner from a typical comic, satiric viewpoint. It actually moves. The night revealing of the second line are associated with the 1,000 sordid images. As you can see, it actually begins in this particular form. The association becomes a kind of a means to reveal the sordidness of existence in the life's masquerades. And Eliot depersonalizes the observer's self to observe the woman's consciousness. This particular orientation is generally being considered as de-doublement, as you can see. The mind relentlessly contemplating its own processes and projecting them in the guise of a woman's consciousness, as you can see. The soul here is constituted of urban dirt and dirtiness. The soul itself is not pure, as was supposed by Platonic philosophers. It is here constituted of industrial waste, garbages, and decayed images. The city of faint stale smells is like a hell of purgatory, where the evils of souls are cleansed. But the irony here is that the hell had lost its purgatory power. It tortures the soul, punishes them by keeping them waiting, and lead it towards slow death. The shabbiness of the unholiness of body is made prominent by this particular section, that is Prelude the Third. So let us continue this particular reading of this particular text. He says that the section actually begins in this particular fashion. You tossed a blanket from the bed. Now what I already suggested, that the second prelude ended with a particular kind of a furnished room. And as I mentioned in my last lecture, that the furnished room is indicating towards a kind of a brothel or maybe the prostitute's quarter, where the immoral loves have been taken for consideration. Now here you will find that this you is actually indicating a kind of prostitute, or a prostitute to be general. And there, what happens within this room? You tossed a blanket from the bed. You lay open your back and waited. Waited for what? The indication is probably at one point you can think that waited for a customer to come. At another point, you will find if it is a kind of a forceful, the violation of chastity, then ultimately you will find that she is waiting to be cleansed, as I mentioned. But this cleansing procedure, that means the typical form of dirt, the typical form of, the corruption and pollution within his body, within her body and her mind. Okay, and she is waiting for to cleanse her body and mind, and she was waiting for that, but that essential form of purgation is completely missing. Okay, so therefore it says that you tossed a blanket from the bed, you lay upon your back and waited, you dozed and watched the night revealing the thousand sordid images. These thousand sordid images are very significantly used by T.S. Eliot here. Why? Because these thousand sordid images of which your soul was constituted, these are actually indicating towards various kinds of, the tussles and various kinds of problems, the various kinds of experiences, devastating experiences that the lady or the girl that have been mentioned here, she has experienced. So each and every moment, each and every encounter with the customers, each and every encounters with the persons, who are representing the parts of the society, they are violating her chastity, they are violating her virginity, they are violating actually her, the rights, So here it says that the thousand sordid images of which your souls was constituted. So it is actually indicating the sordid images are the remainings of our experiences, as you can see. And the soul was overburdened. The soul was constituted with these sordid images. So you dozed, you watched the night revealing, as if you can see, the night has passed and it actually reveals the thousand sordid images, because these are the byproducts of the experiences that you gather during the nights. So you dozed and watched the night revealing the thousand sordid images of which your soul was constituted. As the girl was reclining on her bed, and as if just like a cinematoscopic version, as you can see, that all the images, they are flickering against the ceiling. She was looking at the ceiling, and as if she could see all, or she could envision at the time, all the experiences that she had gathered. Okay, it might be against her willingness, and they were flickering against the ceiling. And when all the world come back to consciousness, to be specific, so when all the world came back, and the light crept up between the shutters. Look at the term, crept up. It is not that the light is actually entering the room, rather it is creeping up. As you can see, it is crept up between the shutters, just like an intruder. So the typical form of negative aspects of the society, the typical form of pollution and corruption, the typical forms of exploitations, each and everything has been taken for consideration here. And she says, therefore, the light crept up between the shutters. So it is a kind of an abysmal darkness that have been indicated here. And in this particular form of darkness, it is not simply the darkness, rather the darkness of immorality. It is the darkness of, corruption. It is the darkness of pollution, because we are leading into the wasteland. So here you will find that the light are creeping up just like the intruders between the shutters. And you heard the sparrows in the gutters. So there is not a kind of a, it's not the nightingale of the skylark, rather the sparrows. And the gutters have been incorporated. It's not the typical form of tree that can lead John Keats into the imaginary land. Rather, it is the sparrows that are chattering, or the twittering of the sparrows in the gutters. So, again, an anti-romantic representation has been taken up. And the light crept up between the shutters, and you heard the sparrows in the gutters. And then it says, you had such a vision of the street as the street hardly understands. So you will find here that Eliot is referring to the vision of the street, and then it says, as the street hardly understands. Manju Jain incorporates that here Eliot probably had a particular reference to the particular poem named Maud, M-A-U-D, by Tennyson, Lord Alfred Tennyson. There was a particular perception of the street itself. The street was personified as if it was experiencing something that is happening in front of him, or rather on him. So ultimately, here also the vision of the street, as the street hardly understands, it means, that means, when the night comes, or with the coming of the night, generally, the images, or maybe the outlook of the street and what happens on the street, these got completely changed, and nobody can think. Okay, the person who doesn't have the direct experience of the streets, and the persons who actually reside there during nights, and the moral immoral activities that have been associated with them, so everything is being hinting, or these are hinted at towards the immoral practices that is happening to be present during nights at the time. So that's why it says that you had such a vision of the street as the street hardly understands. So such kind of a vision that you have experienced, probably these are not to be known to the street itself, right? And now, sitting along the bed's edge, where you curl the papers from your hair, now you are these are actually indicating towards the typical form of artificiality that have been there. There is nothing pure that is existing, you see. The impurities are always there. Nothing is natural, but unnatural references are there. The hairs are not properly curled, rather it has been curled with the help of the papers. So sitting along the bed's edge, where you curl the papers from your hair, or clasped the yellow soles of your feet, again another kind of an indication of immorality. The yellow soles, these are actually indicating towards the deceased personalities, or maybe any particular kind of physical corruption that have been hinted. These are the typical forms of ugliness that have been pointed out. So you curl the papers from your hairs, you are clasping the yellow soles of feet, and in the palms of both soiled hands. The hands are soiled, the feet are the soles of feet are yellow, and you are just curling the papers from your hair. So in each and every image that have been taken for consideration here, you will not find probably these are, or such a kind of an image that have been incorporated with the prostitute here. You cannot find the same kind of image being incorporated by Philip Sidney or Edmund Spenser in their poems. This is not the patterns of amority. This is not the pattern of Astrophil and Stella. But ultimately, you will find in a typical modern society where love itself is being considered to be immoral, because it's a kind of unfrustrated kind of love affair that have been indicated or hinted with the matters of prostitution. You cannot expect anything positive here. So as I've already mentioned, these are the objectives that actually correlate to Eliot's conception of the world, Eliot's conception of London, Eliot's conception of quote-unquote wasteland, as you can see. So ultimately, in each and every perspective, whether it is the matter with the prostitute, whether it is the matter with the masquerades, whether it is the matter with the typical form of immorality that is practiced by the people of the society, everywhere you can find the negative aspects have been incorporated. Now I am reading from Manju Jain's interpretation of this particular poem. Manju Jain writes, it is in the Oxford edition of Eliot's poems, selected poems and a critical readings of selected poems of T.S. Eliot by Manju Jain. It is the Oxford edition. I am reading from this particular section. Manju Jain writes, the preludes may appear to be imagistic representations of urban life, as you can see, recorded without comment, but the objectivity and detachment are illusory. It is difficult to separate the objects of perception from the perceiving consciousness. That means here, as you can see the reference to the street and something like that, you will find that somehow who is watching, who is feeling, the street or the person who perceives. So therefore, this particular kind of a differentiation is not possible. The lonely cab horse in the first section, the lighting of the lamps in the first section, the masquerades that come, the time resumes in the second section, are imbued with the emotions of the observer. It is the observer who thinks of the very monotony and sameness of all the hands raising dingy shades. So what is happening there? Is it the observer that is suffering from the monotony, or rather the things are monotonous? Okay. And perceives human beings as dismembered parts of the body. The muddy feet, the hands, the short square fingers, the eyes assured of certain certainties. This term will come in the fourth section. This fragmentation is a negation of individual identity that Manjujan is pointing out. There is a greater complexity of tone and feeling in Preludes 3 and 4 than in 1 and 2. The you of the third prelude that you can find here, who has such a vision of the street as the street hardly understands, may be a street worker from Philip's Marie Donadieu. Okay, sitting alone the bed's edge where you curl the papers from your hands, etc. The reader is not given an adjective rendering of her perceptions. However, the images are attributed to her consciousness by controlling voice of the poem. The you may also be an instance of dedoublement. That means the you is shifting, you see. Is it the you that is referring to the perceiver, or the reader, or maybe the prostitute, or maybe the street? Nobody knows. So that is the matter with the dedoublement. The you may also be an instance of dedoublement, of the mind remorselessly contemplating its own process and projecting them outwards in the guise of a woman's consciousness. There is a sharper distinction between the perceiving consciousness and the objects of perception in Preludes than in 1 and 2, between the persona's vision of the street and the street itself. The notion of the soul constituted of 1,000 sordid images is a denial of any spiritual dimension to the self. So that is the fundamental observation of Manju Jain regarding this particular section of this particular poem. So ultimately we will find that with the next section, as we have already found that, and I have already mentioned in the introductory part of Eliot's poems, that in Eliot's writing we can find a continual form of journey is being perceptible. Okay, what form of journey? You will find it is a throughout journey. That means the first poem that is written by T.S. Eliot and the last poems, that is the four quartets, ultimately you will find a particular kind of a journey has been incorporated by the poet. It is an academic career or maybe a continual form of journey. So literally what I'm trying to suggest here, you see that though you can find that in each and every poem of T.S. Eliot, there are some problems that have been taken for consideration. The negative aspects of the society, the grimy landscapes and something like that, the corruption, pollution, immorality, and the spiritual vacuum, everything has been incorporated in these poems. But ultimately we have to keep it in mind that Eliot's poems also constitute the positiveness, some positive feeling, some positive interpretations are there always. The hints are there and we have to identify the hint. Now in the next section of this particular poem, though this also negates with the devitalizing of the earth, that is the movement of the earth, but ultimately we will find that the poem actually indicates towards some spiritual perspectives with the term like certain certainties. And how this works we will continue in our next lecture. Thank you.